Good afternoon. It is certainly my pleasure and honor to welcome you to Augustine College. Welcome to the students and to the parents. You have chosen to walk a slightly different path from many of your colleagues, many of whom have gone straight on to university perhaps, and are very intent on beginning their careers. My wife and I were talking about this the other day and going, why were we in such a hurry? You're going to spend 20, 40 years in the same career possibly. You have time. So I congratulate you because you have put first things first, right? You are here, I think, my guess anyway, is that you are here because you feel that you are missing something. What that is, you may not be able to articulate, but you have a sense that Augustine may be able to help you find it. That something can likely be described in many ways, but I want today to suggest that in part it can be described as a vision that provides both a means and a meaning to the education that you will get here and elsewhere afterwards. A vision, I think, and I hope, will act as an antidote to the alternative vision that currently dominates the universities. I'm often amazed when I talk to my colleagues of the titanic efforts that are taken to avoid entirely questions of the purpose of education. If you push a professor, they might mumble something about preparing students for the workplace. Students, on the other hand, are often much more uninhibited and will say that they're there to get a better job. And by better job, they mean a higher paying job. A university education ought not to be so pedestrian. What I want to attempt to do very briefly is describe to you what I think is the descent from skepticism to relativism and finally into cynicism that has characterized the modern university, and then to contrast with that with the vision of education that Augustine College upholds. That vision begins, I think, with the words of Augustine. We can argue whether it's Augustine or Anselm, it doesn't really matter, but when he said, "I believe in order that I may understand." And it is also most beautifully described in the reading from Proverbs 2 that we just had. So I think one of the things that happened is we had this abandonment of the belief leading to understanding, and I think that abandonment can be attributed to no small extent to the success of science. As you will undoubtedly discover as you go through the science course, most of the founders of Western science were all committed Christians. So it was a bit of an irony that their work should lead to the abandonment of the thing that was in fact the very reason for their pursuit. Nonetheless, by the early 1800s, the French mathematician Laplace could present to Napoleon a copy of his work on the solar system in which he would claim that here is knowledge with no need for God. The success of science in explaining the material world and the subsequent rejection of belief preceding understanding led to a profound skepticism where all knowledge outside of science was seen at best to be unknowable and at worst simply mere opinion. The power of science was seen to lie in its ability to impartially scrutinize its subject, and it was this dispassionate criticism of the facts that the other disciplines tried with limited success to emulate. So we have talk about the science of history. We had the rise of the social sciences. Only to limited extent, I would say, did they succeed in trying to parrot the harder sciences. But it was the poet William Wordsworth, I think, who described the profound tragedy that this reduction of knowledge to the scientific brought about. This is a poem from him. "Thus I fared, dragging all passions, notions, shapes of faith, like culprits to the bar, suspiciously calling the mind to establish in plain day her titles and her honors, now believing, now disbelieving, endlessly perplexed, with impulse, motive, right and wrong, the ground of moral obligation, what the rule and what the sanction, till demanding proof and seeking it in everything, I lost all feeling of conviction, and in time, sick wearied out with contrarieties, yielded up moral questions in despair. And for my future studies, as the sole employment of the inquiring faculty, turned towards mathematics and their clear and solid evidence." Now, I'm a mathematician, so maybe I would say, well, that's okay, everybody should study mathematics. But I think there is a profound tragedy in the fact of this removal of any sense of conviction in anything outside of the proofs available through mathematics. This abandonment of belief preceding understanding and the subsequent skepticism that the success of science encouraged and the postmodern backlash made all pervasive had a profound effect on education. No longer is the search for knowledge inspired by a desire to understand and know God. No longer is it imbued as a form of worship. No longer is it tied in any meaningful way to faith, hope, and love. Knowledge as a means of edification has been killed by a skepticism that such knowledge is even there to be found. We can know it works, but can we know that it is true? This led inevitably to a pervasive relativism in regards to the seeking after truth. Alan Bloom, in his book, The Closing of the American Mind, writes the following: "There is one thing a professor can be absolutely certain of. Almost every student entering the university believes, or says he believes, that truth is relative. If this belief is put to the test, one can count on the student's reaction. They will be uncomprehending. That anyone should regard the proposition as not self-evident astonishes them, as though he were calling into question 2 + 2 = 4. These things you don't think about. The students' backgrounds are as various as America can be. They are unified only in their relativism and their allegiance to equality." The university, as well as its students, retreated from any claim to moral knowledge, and thus could only hold itself up as a place of specialized study. The loss of teleology, of a shared understanding of how we ought to live, strips education down to less grand ends, namely the accumulation of facts in order to perform a societal function. To quote Neil Postman, "There was a time when educators became famous for providing reasons for learning. Now they become famous for providing a method." It is not true, however, to say that modern education system is without purpose. By its very nature, education produces a certain kind of person. You can tell what kind of person they are trying to produce by the methods and curriculum they use. Bloom suggests that the purpose of the modern university is to produce students who believe, above all, in equality and openness. Or if you want to talk in more modern terms, diversity, equity, and inclusivity. It is not that these words represent reprehensible things, but rather that the idea of what these words mean has radically changed. As Bloom notes, openness used to be the virtue that permitted us to seek the good through reason. It now means accepting everything and denying reason's power. This dethronement of reason by means of a profound skepticism towards truth leaves no means of persuasion. We are each lost in our own world of opinion, and there is simply no means other than force to promote one understanding over another. He who shouts loudest therefore wins. This is a disquieting development that I think has arisen much more obviously in the last 10 years and suggests a cynical willingness to resort to power where reason will not do. Thus, this vision of education that was born out of a pervasive skepticism and led to a radical commitment to relativism and an inevitable descent into cynicism turns out to be a vision grounded in faith, a commitment to the impossibility of discovering the truth that quickly degenerates into a disingenuous attempt to impose a radical commitment to moral permissiveness through power. I say this is disingenuous because it claims still to hide behind a false claim to neutrality, that somehow it is more reasonable and honest. Drusilla Scott, in her wonderful book on Michael Polanyi, writes, "It is deeply ingrained in the modern mind that it is more honest to doubt than to believe." But Polanyi shows that the way of radical skepticism, that of doubting everything that can be doubted, is impossible and is not practiced by those who advocate it. When they claim that they hold no belief that could be doubted, they simply mean that they have decided not to accept the arguments against the beliefs they do hold. It is impossible to doubt any belief except from a commitment to a different belief. To doubt everything that could be doubted leads not to truth, but to imbecility. In contrast, Augustine College stands in the long tradition of an education motivated by an orthodox understanding of the faith. This faith provides a confidence in the pursuit of knowledge, for it tells us that truth is rooted in the character of a transcendent God, and yet is knowable by us, for he is an immanent God who has made us in his Spirit. Such creatures have every reason to believe that they're in their ability to come to know the truth. Therefore, whether it be scientific, philosophical, or moral truth, it is there to be discovered, not invented, for it has its existence in the character of a transcendent and yet immanent God displayed through his creation. As Butterfield said, if Newton had not had his God, he would not have gone looking for his laws. However, an important caution is required, lest our confidence betray us. Though faith provides a reasonable hope that truth is knowable, it also states unequivocally that our understanding of that truth is necessarily limited. My ways are not your ways, nor are my thoughts your thoughts, says the God of Israel. Or else Paul, writing to the Corinthians, now we know in part. Or in the more poetic translation, now we see through a glass darkly. There may be a sureness of direction, but there is rarely certainty in our knowing, and never completeness. Our voice is that of Job in response to God, who could only say, "Surely I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know." More than that, Christian faith holds that knowledge worth having is not grasped merely by intellectual assent. Jesus said, "Anyone who chooses to do the will of God will find out whether my teaching comes from God or whether I speak on my own." In other words, trust me. Live as I have told you to live, and see if I do not provide you with the assurance you long for. The truth about Jesus Christ is grasped through a lived-out conviction that is taken initially as a step of faith. The modern mind would have us wait until we know with certainty before we act. Christ would have us believe, claiming that as we move forward in reasoned faith, we will receive the assurance that we lack. Moses, when he was confronted by God in the burning bush, asked for a sign. "This is how you will know that it is I who have sent you," replied God. "You will bring the Israelites out of Egypt, and you will come again and worship me on this mountain." I think if I was Moses, I would have said, "That is a very poor sign, God, as it only comes after all the hard work is done." But that is the way of knowledge that is set out by Scripture. To know requires first that we believe and act on that belief, taking the risk that is faith. It is only after that risk is taken that the assurance is given. Abraham had to go all the way to the mountain with his son and come to the point of tying him to the altar before God provided the lamb. For it was only in the act of being willing to sacrifice his son that a deeper trust in God and a deeper knowledge of him was born. Nor is it only spiritual truths that are grasped in this way. Anyone who has pursued a career in research knows that you must commit to an idea if you are to find out if it holds any truth. But always that commitment is tempered by a willingness to be open to indications that you might be wrong. A humble conviction, if you will. The pursuit of knowledge, therefore, cannot be merely about information, precisely because it relies on an act of faith, a stepping out in uncertainty. It is tied, therefore, to the character of the one who is doing the acting. As Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 13, "If I can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, but do not have love, I am nothing." More striking still for me is the description of the pursuit of knowledge in Proverbs 2 that was read earlier. The pursuit of knowledge, according to Proverbs 2, begins with belief. "If you accept my words and store up my commands within you." It requires perseverance and self-discipline, turning your ear to wisdom and applying your heart to understand, and is rooted in love. "If you look for it as for silver and search for it as for hidden treasure, only then will you find the knowledge of God. Only then will you grasp the true purpose of the pursuit of knowledge, of education. Then you will understand what is right and just and fair, every good path. The result will be happiness, but not some ephemeral, fleeting happiness, but a lasting happiness. For wisdom will enter your heart, knowledge will be pleasant to your soul, discretion will protect you, and understanding will guard you." That, I believe, is the vision of education that Augustine upholds in just a few short verses. belief preceding knowledge, knowledge that deepens into assurance only as it is thoughtfully and prayerfully lived out, that in turn blossoms into true and lasting happiness, as even what you desire is molded into the likeness of Christ. Augustine College upholds a confidence, therefore, that this stumbling after truth, however difficult and prone to error it may be, is not without hope, but it is like the treasure hidden in the field that must be sought. While it is to be discovered, it does not reveal itself to those who would examine it impartially. Rather, it must be desired and doggedly pursued as something of greater worth than gold. It must be pursued with conviction, even in the face of doubt. Augustine wrote, "I believe in order that I may understand." We do not come to our pursuit of knowledge from some neutral or objective ground. Rather, we come with beliefs about how the world is, and from that foundation, we seek to push out our understanding into the areas of ignorance. We believe in order to understand. There is no sense that reason and faith are at odds with each other, but rather that faith is an essential element for the right functioning of reason, and that reason is an essential guide to the right functioning of faith. Our task as truth seekers is not to doubt everything we know, but rather to be open to the possibility that what we have chosen to believe could very well be wrong. Our task is to be open to the contradictions that may lead to a revision of our cherished beliefs. Now we see through a glass darkly. Our understanding is limited, but not without hope. Thus, in contrast to the pervasive view in the modern university, Augustine upholds a vision of education that can inspire, because it provides reason to believe that the truth is there to be discovered, because it can engender awe in the greatness of the one in whom all truth resides, because it allows belief to precede and shape understanding, and lastly, because it understands that the pursuit of truth is a moral endeavor, and thus can only be achieved through wisdom, self-discipline, and the cultivation of virtue. Belief preceding knowledge, knowledge that deepens into assurance only as it is thoughtfully and prayerfully lived out, that in turn blossoms into true and lasting happiness. My prayer for you this year is that your year here at Augustine may help set you on that path. God bless.